The Tsar was in the forest. He was just taking a walk when he heard the most terrifying sound. He began to run. He ran as fast as he could. He ran towards the sound. It got louder and louder. He looked around, but he couldn't see anything. What on earth was it? And then the whole forest shook. He looked up and up and up and up, and beyond the forest he could see the mountains. The Tsar ran as fast as he could go back to the palace. As he got there, there was chaos. There were people running in all directions, and the whole palace was shaking just like the forest. He went down the corridors, he went to the great meeting room, and there they were, sat around the table, running around the table, moving this way and that, looking out the windows. And there was his wife, the beautiful Tsarina, with her long golden hair and a crown in her head. "Oh, husband, where have you been?" "I was in the forest," he explained, "when I heard the sound." "What is it?" "Well, look out there, look at the window." And he looked out the window, and he saw it. There, on the top of the mountain, was a giant. And the giant seemed to have a huge cudgel in his hand, and he was swinging it around and swinging it around, and he was bellowing at the top of his voice, "Send out your champion! Send him up here! Let me fight him! And if you do not, I will come down there and I will destroy your palace and I will kill every one of your people. Send out your champion!" So there they sat, around the great table in the meeting hall. All these brave men, these brave women, all warriors, defenders of the Tsardom. And the Tsar sat beside his beautiful Tsarina. Everyone looked scared. Everyone felt scared. And the Tsar stood up and walked around, looked at each one of them and said, "So what is to be done? Who will go and fight the giant?" Nobody answered. They just looked away from the Tsar. And when he asked again, one of them stood up and said, "Your Majesty, the champion should go." Who was the champion? Who won the last great battle, the tournament? And the Tsar stared around the table at each one of those people. Was it a man? Was it a woman? Was it 2 or 3? And when he asked, they all looked away. They looked at their fingers, they looked at the ground, they looked at the table, but they would not look him in the eye. The Tsar stared down the length of the table at his wife. "Tsarina," he said, "there is only one thing to be done. There is no one here, no one, who claims to be the champion. So I will go." "But husband," she said, "you can't go. You are the leader of the people. You are the Tsar. And because I am the Tsar, it is my responsibility. I will go and face this giant. I will not let him come down here. I will do my best. Give me my strongest axe, my sharpest sword. I will fight him." So it was that these things were done. So it was that the Tsar was dressed in armor. So it was that he left the palace. They dropped the drawbridge. They watched him from the high walls. They watched their Tsar go and fight the giant. And all the while, the giant was there with his cudgel waiting for the champion. And the giant looked down and saw someone coming towards him up the mountain. And as for the Tsar, petrified he was. But he was the Tsar, after all. He would fight. And he climbed and he climbed and he climbed that mountain. He held that axe and he held the sword. And as he climbed, the higher he went, the strangest things seemed to happen. The further he went. What is this? Up and up he went until he got to the top of the mountain, and there was the giant. Only now, the giant was so small, he had to reach down He had to reach down and put his hand underneath the giant to lift him up, to be able to see him, because he had become so small. And the Tsar looked at this giant and said, "I don't understand. What has happened to you? What is your name?" And the giant looked at the Tsar and said, "My name is Fear. That is what they call me." "I see," said the Tsar. "I see. And now that you are so close, I am not scared of you anymore. So there you go." And he let Fear go. And he watched Fear run away until it had vanished. I haven't told that story so many times. But many, many years ago, the first time I ever told it was in a story club in Norwich. And I told many big stories that night. And at the end of it, when you're packing away as a storyteller and you're rolling up this and you're rolling up that and people are leaving, there was one person who was sat at the back. Didn't recognize her. She wasn't part of the club. She was still there. And when I'd finished packing up, she walked over to me and she said, "I just want to thank you for the story that you told tonight." And of course I thought she meant the story about the cell key, or the story about the Great War. "No," she said, "not those. No, that little story about the giant and the Tsar, about fear." I realized that I think that story was for me. You see, many years ago, over 20 years ago, my father died and I had a call from my mother. I had just started in my life. I was becoming a scientist in Cambridge. And my mother rang and she said she was sick and could I come home and look after her. So I did, of course. I was her daughter. But she never wanted to be left. So I stayed. I never went back to my job, she said. I stayed and looked after my mother. All these years I looked after her. And I didn't realize, but I became full of fear. And then my mother died. And I had nothing. At least that's what I thought. I was even scared of going outside, even scared of going down to the shop. And it was one day last week when I went down to the shop, full of fear, that I saw a poster on the wall. And it said storytelling in the church hall. So I came, and here I am. And now I know. Now I know, she said, that I came here for that story. Because I want my fear to run away. I don't want to hear anymore. And with that she thanked me. And she walked out. And I never saw her again. That's the power of stories. And it was the first time that I realized that stories aren't just for entertainment. Stories are about us, about the most fundamental things of life, death, living. Exactly. And if that bird is saying what I think it's saying, that's exactly it. Stories are about us, bringing us home, and understanding that nature, forests, trees, birds, we're all on the same journey. My name is Paul Jackson. I'm blessed to be a storyteller.